four Gospels are, I think, to be regarded on the whole as historical documents. I'll even grant the miracles, because speaking as one heavily influenced by Buddhism, we're not very impressed by miracles. The traditions of Asia, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, and so forth, are full of miraculous stories, and we take them in our stride. We don't think that there are any sign of anything in particular except psychic power. And we in the West have, by scientific technology, accomplished things of a very startling nature. We could blow up the whole planet, and Tibetan magicians have never promised to do anything like that. And I'm really a little scared of the growing interest in psychic power, because that's what I call psychotechnics. And so we've made such a mess of things with ordinary techniques that heaven only knows what we might do if we got hold of psychotechnics and started raising people from the dead and prolonging life insufferably and doing everything we wished. I mean, the whole answer to the story of miracles is simply imagine that you're God and that you can have anything you want. Well, you'd have it for quite a long time. And then after a while, we say, this is getting pretty dull, because I know in advance everything that's going to happen. And so you would wish for a surprise. And you would find yourself this evening in this church as a human being. So, I mean, that is the miracle thing. I think miracles are probably possible. That doesn't bother me. And as a matter of fact, when you read the writings of the early fathers of the church, the great theologians like St. Clement, Gregory of Nyssa, St. John of Damascus, even Thomas Aquinas, they're not interested in the historicity of the Bible. They take that sort of for granted, but forget it. They're interested in its deeper meaning. And therefore they always interpret all the tales like Jonah and the whale. They don't bother even to doubt whether Jonah was or was not swallowed by a whale or other big fish. But they see in the story of Jonah and the whale a prefiguration of the resurrection of Christ. And then even when it comes to the resurrection of Christ, they're not worrying about the chemistry or the physics of a risen body. What they're interested in is that the idea of the resurrection of the body has something to say about the meaning of the physical body in the eyes of God. That the physical body, in other words, is not something worthless and unspiritual, but something which is an object of the divine love. And so, therefore, I'm not going to be concerned with whether or not miraculous events happened. It seems to me entirely beside the point. So I regard the four Gospels as, on the whole, as good a historical document as anything else we have from that period, including the Gospel of St. John, and that's important. It used to be fashionable to regard the Gospel of St. John as late. In other words, at the turn of the century, the higher critics of the New Testament assigned the Gospel of St. John to about 125 AD. And the reason was just simple. Those higher critics at that time just assumed that the simple teachings of Jesus could not possibly have included any such complicated mystical theology. And therefore they said, well, it must be later. Now, as a matter of fact, in the text of the Gospel of St. John, the local color, his knowledge of the topography of Jerusalem, and his knowledge of the Jewish calendar is more accurate than that of the other three writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it seems to me perfectly simple to assume that John recorded the inner teaching which he gave to his disciples, and that Matthew, Mark, and Luke record the more exoteric teaching which he gave to people at large. Now, what about then the authority of these scriptures? We could take this problem in two steps. lot of people don't know how we got the Bible at all. We Westerners got the Bible thanks to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church and members of the Church wrote the books of the New Testament. And they took over the books of the Old Testament, which even by the time of Christ had not been finally decided upon by the Jews. The Jews did not close the canon of the Old Testament until the year 100 AD or thereabouts at the Synod of Jamnia. And then they finally decided which were the canonical books of the Hebrew Scriptures and embodied them in the Masoretic text, the earliest copy of which dates from the 10th century, early in the 10th century AD. The books to be included in the New Testament were not finally decided upon until the year 382 AD again, at the Synod of Rome under Pope Damasus. So it was the Church, the Catholic Church, that promulgated the Bible and said, we are giving you these scriptures on our authority and by the authority of the informal tradition that has existed among us from the beginning, inspired by the Holy Spirit. So you receive historically the Bible on the Church's say-so. And the Catholic Church insists, therefore, that the Church collectively, speaking under the presumed guidance of the Holy Spirit, has the authority to interpret the Bible. And you can take that or leave it. Because obviously, the authority of the Bible is not, first of all, based on the Bible itself. I can write a Bible and state within that book that it is indeed the Word of God which I have received. And you're at liberty to believe me or not. Hindus believe that the Vedas are divinely revealed and inspired with just as much fervor as any Christian or any Jew. Muslims believe that the Quran is divinely inspired. And some Buddhists believe that their sutras are also of divine, or rather a Buddhic origin. The Japanese believe that the ancient texts of Shinto are likewise of divine origin. And who is to be judge? If we're going to argue about this as to which version of the truth is the correct one, we will always end up in an argument in which the judge and the advocate are the same person. And you wouldn't want that if you were brought into a court of law, would you? Because if I say that, well, thinking it all over, I find that Jesus Christ is the greatest being who ever came onto this earth, by what standards do I judge? Why, obviously, I judge by the sort of moral standards that have been given to me as somebody brought up in a Christian culture. There is nobody impartial who can decide between all the religions, because more or less everybody has been, in one way or another, influenced by one of them. So if the Church says the Bible is true, it finally comes down to you. Are you going to believe the Church or aren't you? If nobody believes the Church, it will be perfectly plain, won't it, that the Church has no authority. Because the people is always the source of authority. That's why de Tocqueville said that a people gets what government it deserves. And so you may say, well, God himself is the authority. Well, how are we to show that? That's your opinion. Well, you say, well, you wait and see. The day of judgment is coming, and then you'll find out who's the authority. Yes, but at the moment, there is no evidence for the day of judgment. And it remains, until there is evidence, simply your opinion that the day of judgment is coming. And there is nothing else to go on, except the opinion of other people who hold the same view and whose opinions you bought. So really, I won't deny anybody's right to hold these opinions. You may indeed believe that the Bible is literally true, and that it was actually dictated by God to Moses and the prophets and the apostles. That may be your opinion, and you are at liberty to hold it. I don't agree with you. I do believe, on the other hand, that there is a sense in which the Bible is divinely inspired. But I mean by inspiration something utterly different from dictation. Receiving a dictated message from an omniscient authority. I think inspiration comes very seldom in words. In fact, almost all the words written down by automatic writing from psychic input that I've ever read strike me as a bit thin. When a psychic begins to try and write of deep mysteries instead of telling you what your sickness is or who your grandmother was, he begins to get superficial. And psychically communicated philosophy is never as interesting as philosophy carefully thought out. But divine inspiration isn't that kind of communication. Divine inspiration is, for example, to feel, for reasons that you can't really understand, that you love people. Divine inspiration is a wisdom which it's very difficult to put into words, like mystical experience. That's divine inspiration. And a person who writes out of that experience could be said to be divinely inspired. Or it might come through dreams, through archetypal messages from the collective unconscious, through which the Holy Spirit could be said to work. But since inspiration always comes through a human vehicle, it is liable to be distorted by that vehicle. In other words, I'm talking to you through a sound system, and it's the only one now available. Now, if there's something wrong with this sound system, whatever truths I might utter to you will be distorted. My voice will be distorted. And you might mistake the meaning of what I said. Now, so therefore, everybody who receives divine inspiration, and I'm using that in a very loose way, you can mean anything you like by divine, that's your option. But anybody who receives it will express it within the limits of what language he knows. And by language here, I don't only mean English, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, or Sanskrit. I mean language in the sense of what sort of terms are available to you. What kind of religion were you brought up with? Now you see, if you were brought up in the Bible Belt, you came out of Arkansas somewhere, and that's all the religion you knew, and you had a mystical experience of the type where you suddenly discover that you are one with God, then you're liable to get up and say, I'm Jesus Christ. And lots of people do. Well, the culture that we live in just can't allow that. There's only one Jesus Christ. And sort of you don't look like you were Jesus Christ coming back again, because it's said in the scriptures that when he comes back, there'll be no doubt about it. He'll appear in the heavens with legions of angels, and you're not doing that. You're just old Joe Dokes that we knew years ago, and now you say you're Jesus Christ. Well, he says that when Jesus Christ said he was God, nobody believed him, and you don't believe again. You know, you can't answer that argument. But you see, he says it that way because he is trying to express what happened to him in terms of a religious language which is circumscribed by the Holy Bible. He's never read the Upanishads. He's never read the Diamond Sutra. He's never read the Tibetan Book of the Dead or the I Ching or the Lao Tzu. And therefore, there is no other way in which he can say this. But if he had read the Upanishads, he would have had no difficulty, and nor would the culture, the society in which he was talking, have any difficulty. Because it says in the Upanishads, we are all incarnations of God. Only they don't mean by the word God. In fact, they don't use that word. They use Brahman. They don't mean the same thing that a Hebrew meant by God. because the Brahman is not personal. Brahman is, we would say, suprapersonal, not impersonal, because that is a negation, but I would say suprapersonal. Brahman is not he or she, has no sex. Brahman is not the creator of the world as something underneath and subject to Brahman, but the actor of the world, the player of all the parts, so that everyone is a mask, which is the meaning of the word person, in which the Brahman plays a role. And like an absorbed actor, the divine spirit gets so absorbed in playing the role as to become it, and to be bewitched, and this is all part of the game, into believing I am that role. When you were babies, you knew who you were. Psychoanalysts refer to that as the oceanic feeling. They don't really like it, but they admit that it exists, where the baby cannot distinguish between the world and the way it acts upon the world. It's all one process, which is, of course, the way things are. But we learn very quickly because we're taught very quickly what is you and what is not you. What is voluntary, what is involuntary, because you can be punished for the voluntary but not for the involuntary. And so we unlearn what we knew in the beginning. And in the course of life, if we're fortunate, we discover again what we really are, that each one of us is what would be called in Arabic or Hebrew a son of God. And the word son of means of the nature of, as when you call someone a son of a bitch. Or in Arabic you say Ebni Kelb, which means son of a dog, Ebni El Homar, son of a donkey. So, a son of Belial means an evil person. Son of God means a divine person. Human being who has realized union with God. Now my assumption, my opinion, is that Jesus of Nazareth was a human being, like Buddha, like Sri Ramakrishna, like Ramana Maharshi, etc., who early in life had a colossal experience of what we call cosmic consciousness. Now, you don't have to be any particular kind of religion to get this experience. It can hit anyone, anytime, like falling in love. There are obviously a number of you in this building who've had it, in greater or lesser degree. But it's found all over the world. And when it hits you, you know it. Sometimes it comes after long practice of meditations and spiritual discipline. Sometimes it comes for no reason that anybody can determine. We say it's the grace of God. That there comes this overwhelming conviction that you have mistaken your identity. That what you thought, what I thought was just old Alan Watts, who I know very well is just a big act and a show. But what I thought was in me was only completely superficial. That I am an expression of an eternal something or other. X. A name that can't be named, as the name of God was taboo among the Hebrews. I am. And that I suddenly understand why, exactly why everything is the way it is. It's perfectly clear. Furthermore, I feel no longer any boundary between what I do and what happens to me. I feel that everything that's going on is my doing, just as my breathing is. Is your breathing voluntary or involuntary? Do you do it or does it happen to you? So you can feel it both ways. But you feel everything like breathing. And it isn't as if you have become a puppet. There is no longer any separate you. There is just this great happening going on. And if you have the name in your background, you will say, this happening is God, or the will of God, or the doing of God. Or if you don't have that word in your background, you will say with the Chinese, it is the flowing of the Tao. Or if you're a Hindu, you will say it is the Maya of Brahman. The Maya means the magical power, the creative illusion, the play. So you can very well understand how people to whom this happens feel genuinely inspired, because very often there goes along with it an extremely warm feeling, because you see the divine in everybody else's eyes. When Kabir, a great Hindu-Muslim mystic, was a very old man, he used to look around at people and say, to whom shall I preach? Because he saw the beloved in all eyes. And could see, sometimes I look into people's eyes, and I can look right down, and I can see that beloved in the depths of those pools. And yet the expression on the face is saying, what, me? It's the funniest thing. But there is everybody, in his own peculiar way, playing out an essential part in this colossal cosmic drama. And it's so strange that one can even feel it in people you thoroughly dislike. So, let's suppose then that Jesus had such an experience. But, you see, Jesus has a limitation. That he doesn't know of any religion other than those of the immediate Near East. He might know something about Egyptian religion, a little bit maybe about Greek religion, but mostly about Hebrew. There is no evidence whatsoever that he knew anything about India or China. And people who think, Jesus was God, assume that he must have known because he would have been omniscient. No. St. Paul makes it perfectly clear in the epistle to the Philippians that Jesus renounced his divine powers so as to be man. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought not equality with God a thing to be hung on to, but humbled himself and made himself of no reputation, and was found in fashion as a man, and became obedient to death. Theologians call that kenosis, which means self-emptying. So, obviously, an omnipotent and omniscient man would not really be a man. So even if you take the very orthodox Catholic doctrine of the nature of Christ, that he was both true God and true man, you must say that for true God to be united with true man, true God has to make a voluntary renunciation, for the time being, of omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence, for that matter. Now, therefore, if Jesus were to come right out and say, I am the Son of God, that's like saying I'm the boss's son. Or I am the boss. And everybody immediately says that is blasphemy. That is subversion. That is trying to introduce democracy into the kingdom of heaven. That is, you are a usurper of the throne. No man has seen God. Now, Jesus, in his exoteric teaching, as recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, was pretty cagey about this. He didn't come right out there and say, I and the Father are one. Instead, he identified himself with the Messiah described in the second part of the prophet Isaiah. The suffering servant who was despised and rejected of men. And this man is the non-political Messiah, in other words. It was convenient to make that identification, even though it would get him into trouble. But to his elect disciples, as recorded in St. John, he came right out and said, before Abraham was, I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the living bread that comes down from heaven. I and the Father are one, and he who has seen me has seen the Father. And there can be no mistaking that language. So the Jews found out, and they put him to death, or had him put to death, for blasphemy. This is no cause for any special antagonism to the Jews. We would do exactly the same thing. It's always done. It happened to one of the great Sufi mystics in Persia, who had the same experience. Now what happened? The apostles didn't quite get the point. They were awed by the miracles of Jesus. They worshipped him as people do worship gurus. And it's, you know, to what lengths that can go if you've been around guru land. And so the Christians said, okay, Jesus of Nazareth was the Son of God, but let it stop right there. Nobody else. So what happened was that Jesus was pedestalized. He was put in a position that was safely upstairs, so that his troublesome experience of cosmic consciousness would not come and cause other people to be a nuisance. And those who have had this experience and expressed it during those times when the church had political power were almost invariably persecuted. Gordiano Bruno was burnt at the stake. John Scotus Erigena was excommunicated. Meister Eckhart's theses were condemned, and so on and so on. A few mystics got away with it because they used cautious language. But you see what happens. If you pedestalize Jesus, you strangle the gospel at birth. And it has been the tradition in both the Catholic Church and in Protestantism to pass off what I will call an emasculated gospel. Gospel means good news. And I cannot for the life of me think what is the good news about the gospel as ordinarily handed down. Because look here. Here is the revelation of God in Christ, in Jesus. And we are supposed to follow his life and example without having the unique advantage of being the boss's son. Now, the tradition, both Catholic and Protestant fundamentalist, represents Jesus to us as a freak, born of a virgin, knowing he is the Son of God, having the power of miracles, knowing that basically it's impossible to kill him. He's going to rise again in the end. And we are asked to take up our cross and follow him when we don't know that about ourselves at all. So what happens is this. We are delivered, therefore, a gospel which is in fact an impossible religion. It's impossible to follow the way of Christ. All right. Many a Christian has admitted it. I'm a miserable sinner. I fall far short of the example of Christ. But do you realize, the more you say that, the better you are. Because what happened was that Christianity institutionalized guilt as a virtue. You see, you can never come up to it. Never. And therefore, you will always be aware of your shortcomings. And so the more shortcomings you feel, the more, in other words, you are aware of the vast abyss between Christ and yourself. You will have your opportunity to speak in the question period, madam. So, you go to confession. And if you've got a nice, dear, understanding confessor, he won't get angry with you. He'll say, my child, you know you've sinned very grievously, but you must realize that the love of God and of our Lord is infinite, and that naturally you are forgiven. As a token of thanksgiving, say 3 Hail Marys. And you know you've committed a murder and robbed a bank and fornicated around and so on. And the priest is perfectly patient and quiet. Well, you feel awful. Think, I have done that. To the love of God, I have wounded Jesus, grieved the Holy Spirit, and so on. But you know in the back of your mind that you're going to do it all over again. You won't be able to help yourself. You'll try. But there's always a greater and greater sense of guilt. Now, the lady objected that I was putting up a straw man and knocking it down. This is the Christianity of most people. Now, there is a much more subtle Christianity of the theologians, the mystics, and the philosophers. But it's not what gets preached from the pulpit. Grant you. But the message of Billy Graham is approximately what I've given you. And of all, what I will call fundamentalist forms of Catholicism and Protestantism. What would the real gospel be? The real good news is not simply that Jesus of Nazareth was the Son of God, but that he was a powerful Son of God who came to open everybody's eyes to the fact that you are too. And this is perfectly plain. If you will go to the 10th chapter of St. John, verse 30, there is the passage where Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And there are some people who are not intimate disciples around, and they're horrified. And they immediately pick up stones to stone him. He says, many good works I have shown you from the Father, and for which of these do you stone me? And they said, for a good work we stone you not, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. And he replied, isn't it written in your law, I have said you are gods? He's quoting the 82nd Psalm. Is it not written in your law, I have said, you are gods? If God called then those to whom he gave his word gods, and you can't deny the scriptures, how can you say I blaspheme? Because I said, I am a son of God. Well, there's the whole thing in a nutshell. Of course, if you read the King James Bible that descended with the angel, you will see in italics in front of these words son of God, the son of God, because I said I am the son of God. And most people think that the italics are for emphasis. They're not. The italics indicate words interpolated by the translators. You will not find that in the Greek. The Greek says a son of God. So it seems to me here perfectly plain that Jesus got it in the back of his mind that this isn't something peculiar to himself. So when he says, I am the way, no man comes to the Father but by me, this I am, this me, is the divine in us, which in Hebrew would be called the Ruach Adonai. There's a great deal of made of this by the esoteric Jews, the Kabbalists and the Hasidim. The Ruach is the breath which God breathed into the nostrils of Adam. It is differing from the soul. The individual soul in Hebrew is called nephesh. And so we translate the Ruach into the Greek pneuma and the nephesh into psyche or psyche. The spirit. And you ask a theologian what's the difference between the soul and the spirit, and he won't be able to tell you. But it's very clear in St. Paul's writings. So the point is that the Ruach is the divine in the creature, by virtue of which we are sons of, or of the nature of God. Manifestations of the divine. This discovery is the gospel, that is the good news. But this has been perpetually repressed throughout the history of Western religion, because all Western religions have taken the form of celestial monarchies and therefore have discouraged democracy in the kingdom of heaven. Until, as a consequence of the teaching of the German and Flemish mystics, in the 15th century, there began to be such movements as the Anabaptists, the Brothers of the Free Spirit, and the Levelers and the Quakers. A spiritual movement which came to this country and founded a republic. And not a monarchy. And how could you say that a republic is the best form of government if you think that the universe is a monarchy? Obviously, if God is top on a monarchy, monarchy is the best form of government. But you see, ever so many citizens of this republic think they ought to believe that the universe is a monarchy. And therefore they are always at odds with the republic. It is from principally white, racist Christians that we have the threat of fascism in this country. Because you see, they have a religion which is militant, which is not the religion of Jesus, which was the realization of divine sonship, but the religion about Jesus, which pedestalizes him, and which says only this man, of all the sons of woman, was divine, and you had better recognize it. And so it speaks of itself as the church militant, the onward Christian soldiers marching us to war. utterly exclusive, convinced in advance of examining the doctrines of any other religion that it is the top religion. And so it becomes a freak religion, just as it has made a freak of Jesus, an unnatural man. It claims uniqueness, not realizing that what it does teach would be far more credible if it were truly Catholic, that is to say, restated again the truths which have been known from time immemorial, which have appeared in all the great cultures of the world. But even very liberal Protestants still want to say, somehow, so as I suppose to keep the mission effort going, or to pay off the mortgage. Yes, these other religions are very good. God has no doubt revealed himself through Buddha and Lao Tzu. But now, obviously, it is a matter of temperament. You can be loyal to Jesus just as you're loyal to your own country. But you are not serving your country if you think that it's necessarily the best of all possible countries. That is doing a disservice to your country. It is refusing to be critical where criticism is proper. So of religion. Every religion should be self-critical. Otherwise, it soon degenerates into a self-righteous hypocrisy. If then we can see this, that Jesus speaks not from the situation of a Deus ex machina, a kind of weird, is a voice that have said in every place and time, wake up, and realize who you are. Now, I don't think you see until churches get with that they're going to have very much relevance. You see, popular Protestantism and popular Catholicism will tell you nothing about mystical religion. The message of the preacher, 52 Sundays a year, is, dear people, be good. We've heard it ad nauseam. Or believe in this. He may occasionally give a sermon on what happens after death or the nature of God. But basically, the sermon is be good. But how? As St. Paul said, to will is present with me. But how to do that which is good I find not, for the good that I would that I do not, and the evil that I would not that I do. How are we going to be changed? Obviously, there cannot be a vitality of religion without vital religious experience. And that's something much more than emoting over singing Onward Christian Soldiers. But you see, what happens in our ecclesiastical goings-on is that we run a talking shop. We pray. We tell God what to do or give advice, as if he didn't know. We read the scriptures. And remember, talking of the Bible, Jesus said, you search the scriptures daily, for in them you think you have life. St. Paul made some rather funny references about the spirit which giveth life and the letter which kills. I think the Bible ought to be ceremoniously and reverently burned every Easter. We need it no more because the Spirit is with us. It's a dangerous book. And to worship it is, of course, a far more dangerous idolatry than bowing down to images of wood and stone. As nobody in his senses can confuse a wooden image with God, but you can very easily confuse a set of ideas with God, because concepts are more rarefied and abstract. So with this endless talking in church, we can preach, but by and large preaching does nothing but excite a sense of anxiety and guilt. And you can't love out of that. No scolding, no rational demonstration of the right way to behave is going to inspire people with love. Something else must happen. Well, we'll say, what are we going to do about it? Do about it. You have no faith? Be quiet. Even Quakers aren't quiet. They sit in meeting and think. At least some of them do. But supposing we are really quiet, we don't think. Be absolutely silent through and through. We say, well, you'll just fall into a blank. Oh, ever tried? I feel then, you see, that it's enormously important that churches stop being talking shops. They become centers of contemplation. What is contemplation? Contemplum. It's what you do in the temple. You don't come to the temple to chatter. But to be still and know that I am God. And this is why, if the Christian religion, if the gospel of Christ is to mean anything at all, instead of just being one of the forgotten religions, along with Osiris and Mithra, we must see Christ as the great mystic. In the proper sense of the word mystic, not someone who has all sorts of magical powers and understands spirits and so on. A mystic, strictly speaking, is one who realizes union with God, by whatever name. This seems to me the crux and message of the gospel. Summed up in the prayer of Jesus, which St. John records, as he speaks over his disciples, praying that they may be one, even as you, Father, and I are one, that they may be all one. All realize this divine sonship, or oneness, basic identity with the eternal energy of the universe and the love that moves the sun and other stars. 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 Stars.
I feel like I could do anything.
When you look this good, you can.
I can?
These 2 days are a coming together of two institutions that I really respect. Consciousness Studies at JFK University and Original Face Video. I think both of these institutions are at the leading edge of a society. They're like pseudopods that reach out to touch what is living truth at that moment in the culture. Later we're going to take questions and dialogue, but I thought for a while anyway, I just reflect. And I'm risking, not out of irresponsibility, but out of the feeling that the more spontaneous the moment, the more fully we will be here together. I'm risking not coming with prepared material. I think you have seen in these past 2 days different stages of growth, not only the disappearance of the growth, but different stages of my own journey, my own spiritual journey, which is still very much ongoing and stretches on an unknown distance in which I've stopped counting. In the old days, I used to have some estimate of when I'd get enlightened. But that has long gone, and I've learned patience, and I will. Actually, I wish I had the longing of a Rumi or a Kabir to be done, but I don't. I'm a little more like Hanuman in many ways, but in this particular way. Hanuman is a monkey. I don't know whether all of you know about Hanuman, but Hanuman is my Ishtadev, or in Hinduism, that face of God that is my own lineage. And Hanuman is a monkey, which accounts for my somewhat simian qualities. And Hanuman is a monkey he's a very high saint in the form of a monkey. And he is serving Ram, who is God, and that's why my name is Ram Das, which means servant of Ram, which is another name for Hanuman. And he serves Ram, and it is a form of bhakti, or devotional yoga, in which the relation of the devotee to God is that of servant to master. There are other forms like lover to beloved, or a child to father, child to mother, like Ramakrishna's relation to Kali, for example. That's very different. That is not a service relationship. But Hanuman lives only to serve Ram. And he serves him incredibly because he is so one-pointed in his love of God that he gains immense power, that he can do almost anything because of the intensity of his devotion. And the drama, which I won't spell out in great detail, involves the fact that Ram's wife Sita has been stolen away by the bad guy, Ravana, who's really a good guy in drag, but that's another story. And Hanuman goes looking for Sita, and he takes Ram's ring with him to give to Sita if he finds her. And Sita is living out in the world like we are, in a way. And she's living in a very worldly place, which is the sort of demon loka in the Ramayana, which is the name of this holy book. And Hanuman is really going from God to remind Sita, who in this case is a devotee of Ram, she's wife and devotee, to remind the devotee who's lost in the world or caught in the world that God has not forgotten her. And he brings the ring as reassurance that that has not happened. And that act of coming out into the world and bringing reassurance that the spirit is still alive and well, if you will, and that you are still connected and you haven't lost it, is such a treasure from Ram's point of view, from God's point of view, that when Hanuman comes back to Ram, Ram embraces him and says, "What you've done, there's no way I can repay you." This is God speaking to Hanuman. "I can never repay you for what you've done. You are as dear to me as my brother Bharat." And Hanuman is kneeling before Ram. And at this point, Ram leans over to lift Hanuman up, to put him on the seat beside him, with the idea that it's like the merging with God. It's like the union. And Hanuman makes himself into stone, and he pushes against God in order to keep that distance so he can stay separate so he can remain in the relation of a devotee to God rather than merging. Because when you merge, it's all over. The rush, it's the end of it. See? And Hanuman, Ram says, what can I do for you? What do you want, Hanuman? He tries giving him jewels, a beautiful jewel necklace, and Hanuman takes them in his teeth and bites them apart and throws them aside. And somebody said, how can you do that, Hanuman? Throw those jewels aside. Those are very costly jewels. He says they're of no use at all because they don't have Ram's name written on them anywhere. See, I mean, he's so one-pointed. And one of the other devotees says, well, Hanuman, if you think that, why don't you throw your body away? And at that point, Hanuman rips his body open, and there on every bone and sinew is written Ram, 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 you see. And then Hanuman heals his body. I mean, Ram touches his body, and it's all healed. And what Ram says, what can I do for you, Hanuman? I'll do anything. And Hanuman says, what I would like is to be always your devotee. I would like always to be present when the Ramayana is recited, and I'd just like to be eternally your devotee. And that is an interesting, it's remaining in dualism. And it's very interesting that there are stages in the spiritual journey where it feels like such an incredible uphill journey, where you lose it. Oh, I lost it. I've fallen. I used to be high back in the 60s, and then I lost it. I mean, that's a very common theme. And what happened? I mean, I got married, and the kids, and the insurance, and the car payments, and I don't know what happened. I lost it. Well, it's absurd. You don't lose it. I mean, where can you go? It just is, you got probably a little pseudo-high first. Got a little higher than you were, and you have to go back and clean up your act a little bit and get your ground, because you don't go into the totality pushing away any part of your life. And if you try to push away your earth or your worldly connections or your grounding, send them around again, Sam. You know, I mean, it doesn't happen that way. You got to keep going around and around until you're not pushing and pulling. And as it gets lighter and as you start to delight, there gets a point where it starts to be very playful. I mean, even the hard parts are playful, which is really strange. And it starts to become like dancing or floating or surfing or something like that. Life, the stuff of life. Because the balance went from where you're in the world really lost. I want this, I don't want this, I have an opinion about this, I don't like that, give me, don't give me, you did this to me, you know, things like that. I don't have enough money, my body's decaying, all those things. And it's all real. And in the midst of all those screaming trumpets, there might be the tiniest little sound of the flute, the inner, the still small voice within that the Quakers talk about. The little tiny voice that says, that's not all there is. And you say, oh, shut up, you know, you don't realize how tough it is being alive, you know. See, and it's at first you just kind of ignore that little voice. It's the tiniest little whisper of equanimity in the midst of all the Sturm und Drang of what all. And then, over time, that little thread gets stronger and stronger and stronger. The image I often have is that story, I just recently told it in a lecture, of the man that's imprisoned in a tower, and his wife is trying to get him out, and they won't let her in, of course, and so she gets a beetle and ties a silk thread to the beetle and sends the beetle up, and the beetle keeps climbing up until it gets to the top of the tower. And then the husband pulls the silk thread, and then she ties a little string to the silk thread, and then a rope to the string. Finally, he's got a rope, and he climbs down and escapes. And in a way, that's a little bit what it's like. At first, there's just this little teeny thread of consciousness. And it only happens now and then. You flicker into awareness that this isn't quite, the worldly trip isn't quite what it's all about. And then, through a whole set of circumstances that are a process of evolution of the individual consciousness, that little thread becomes a string, and the string becomes a rope, and the percentage of time you get lost in the world starts to diminish. And there's a critical moment when it becomes less than 50%. mean, as long as it's more than 50, it still seems like you're caught in the world. And then it starts to get down until pretty soon your faith gets strong enough that you are, in essence, a spiritual being who's living in the world, which is what Christ is talking about when he says you are in the world but not of the world. And that becomes such a deep faith in you that you can breathe a sigh of relief. It's like you're home. You're beginning to go home now. You've turned the corner, and the panic starts to leave you, that terrible panic of I'm going to lose it, and it's going to be terrible. And then it's interesting what happens, because as that you turn that corner and you start to get that stronger faith, it goes faster and faster. The rope gets stronger and stronger, and the reality of the Spirit gets greater and greater, and then you start to push against it because you want to enjoy it for a while, because it's so nice, because you look around and you're so in love with everybody. It's like everywhere you look is your beloved. And that's quite a different thing from I love you, but I don't really care for you. It's a different level of consciousness you're playing from. And you just look out and it's so loving. And it's all so delightful, and you're appreciating the kind of the way of things, the Tao, the harmony of things. And then you get like Hanuman pushing against God. You say, well, not just yet. You know, it's like extending the foreplay. You know, some of you may understand that. That's an esoteric reference. One of the things that that I have sensed more and more is a term that's very, very hard for me to communicate to people, because every time I say it, I feel the kind of resistance to even thinking the term, which is the word perfection. That the way of things is just the way it's supposed to be. And that is a real stinker. I mean, and everybody throws up to oneself. I mean, when you say perfection, part of me says, what do you mean perfection? Look at nuclear paranoia and misery. Look at exploitation. You call that perfect? And it's very delicate to deal with that concept. And see if I can. Today I spent the afternoon with a fellow who has AIDS. Now his body is. We were talking about how sometimes one sickness after another, they just keep coming one after another, until finally you just kind of cry and sob because you just had enough. I mean, you just, oh, another one. Oh, another one. Oh, another one. Just so much. And I was looking at what was causing the suffering in him. Now, this is a heavy-duty one. And I saw that what was causing the suffering was his attachment to his model of who he was. I mean, if you look at the things you go through, you grow and you go through puberty, and then you have love affairs and they break up, and then you have economic this and that and all that stuff. And a lot of the times you can say, well, that's okay, that's part of the process of life. Usually when you're in the midst of them, you don't say that. You say, oh, if it was only different than this, if I only had enough money, if this relationship was only working out, if you always have a model of how you wish it were other than the way it is. And there is a little flip that occurs when you look at things just the way they are, without expectation and without model, of letting go of expectation and letting go of model. You can have them around, but you don't hold the attachment to them. I mean, for this fellow this afternoon, the existential fact is, there he was, lying on the bed, sweating, nausea, some bleeding, pain. Models of himself, of who he used to be, pictures on the wall of who he was, not who he is now. constantly comparing. That comparison is constantly recreating the suffering of the model of who he is. And if you have a model of life as something that has no suffering in it, no unexpected reverses, nothing that you didn't plan for, look at how much suffering you're in for. You can see it. Because life isn't like that. And one of the things that Buddha taught was the continuous quality of change of all form in the universe, of which your body and your life expectancy and your mind and the social situation and the world situation, all of that is changing, constantly changing. So that every time your mind grabs hold of a model of who you are, where you're going, an expectation that it's going to be a certain way, you're just asking for suffering. Can you hear? This may be obvious to all of you, but it's a place that I get caught a lot, very subtly. And I was watching today, and I kept saying to this fellow, well, here we are. Be here now, so to speak. And I said, just open. Let's open, and open to the sweating. Just allow the sweating to be. Here it is. We're all sweating. Sweating is. And a little bleeding is, and there's some pain and nausea. It's all is. And there's the sound of the refrigerator. And there's my voice. And I'm here. And we're two awarenesses sharing the dilemma of incarnation together. And as we talked, he went from busy being a sweating, nauseous, frightened person to being a completely peaceful, open, present being. And it took I'd say about 4 minutes. Now, he trusted me. He'd written me a letter, and I answered, and I came. And he trusted me, and so that when I started to guide that meditation, he just went with it right away. I just sat on the bed, and I held him, and I just went through this meditation. Now, I thought, when I leave the room, he's going to grab back again, because he's got the pictures on the walls, he's got all the stuff that's going to reinforce that idea of, if I didn't have this damn sickness, I could, or. And my heart goes out to a human being whose mind creates their own suffering. You say, is the AIDS itself the suffering, or is the mind in relation to the AIDS the suffering? Is the fact that I am bald the suffering, or is it my mind in relation to my baldness that might create suffering? When I went bald, I've told this many times, but when I was going bald, I was busy not going bald. I was a person with hair that was obviously losing it. And you know what I did. I got a long strand, and I sort of did this thing to it, and I stood it with the wind, and the wind, I would stand like this. And I was busy holding on to a model of who I was a moment before. Just recently, I had perhaps one of the greatest gifts of my life. I had 5 months of nursing my stepmother through cancer to her death. And she died in my arms. And she was a tough lady, and she was very independent, and she knew she was a woman of spirit, but not in any way of, she hadn't thought about it a lot. She just had a deep spiritual essence to her. But she and I didn't always get along too well, but we did pretty well. I didn't stay around too much, but we did pretty well. And then she got sick. And at first, there was all holding on to who she was. She controlled the house, and she'd be in bed and very weak, so that I would start to take over the house. So in the kitchen, there were things like that. She had collected these seashells, and she kept them around the sink all the time. And they were always in the way when you did the dishes. So now, as I moved in and started to take over the kitchen, I sort of put the shells a little bit to the side. And she came in her wheelchair one day. And she got furious because the shells weren't there. Because she felt like she was being deposed. This was her home, right? I mean, you hear the issue. And then I watched as the process went on, and the suffering deepened, and the letting go went until pretty soon we started to grow together, and we were like becoming lovers. We would lie in the bed holding each other and just talk. We'd talk about death and what it was going to be like after death. And we were putting in catheters and being carried to the toilet and making milkshakes and doing all the process until finally that room was like a beautiful ashram. It was one of the most peaceful spaces. I mean, we all loved hanging out in that room. It was just absolutely so gentle. And she had converted, transformed into being this very soft, present being. She had let go of this mind that grabbed and held so tightly. We just got softer and softer and softer until her death was just a whisper of just letting go at that moment. She sat up, she took 3 breaths, and she left. And I watched this woman who 4 months before I had models of keep your distance, be careful, because she can blow up, she's very volatile. And then watching and seeing how my ability to let go of my models of who she was allowed the process to happen so much faster. My father, who I take care of now, he's 88. And when we were growing up, he was very busy with his own career, and he was a father that protected us and provided for us, but he didn't have much time for us. And he was a little bit remote. And my brothers didn't have much tremendous love for him, actually. I mean, they might have loved him, but they really had a hard time. They were judging him as having not been a good enough father. And somewhere along the way, I just started letting go of models. And he has changed. He's had some minor strokes. He's just like the Buddha now. I mean, he just sits there and smiles all the time. And he's absolutely beautiful. He's totally happy. I've never seen a happier being in my life. I mean, he can pass out and vomit, and you look at him and he's smiling. I mean, it's just incredible. I say, does it bother you? The vomit's on? Yeah. And he's sharp as a tack. I mean, he's not lost it. I said to him, you gave $750 to the temple last year. What would you like me to give this year? He said, $350. I mean, this is somebody who's out of it. Most everybody says, too bad about you, Father. He's not there anymore. The hell he isn't there. He's just 88. He doesn't care to play most of the time. I don't blame him, to tell you the truth. He sees through it all. But what I've now got is this relationship with this totally beautiful present being. And I was talking to a therapist, and I said, I don't have much sense of history. So he said, when were we together last? I said, I have no idea when we were together last. He said, was it 3 or 4 years? I said, I don't know. I said, this man that I'm with now, who is my father, I don't remember who he was anymore. I mean, it's just, he says, well, do you think that's exactly healthy? I mean, you can hear that edge, I mean, are you really dealing with your father properly? But what's happened is we're living in the present moment, not in what was. And people come into the house continually and say, they remember my father as having been, he's founded Brandeis University, he was co-founded Einstein Medical School, he was a president of a railroad. I mean, he was a real mover and shaker and had lots of stories and a tremendous rich life. And now it's all gone. He's just here. And everybody says, isn't it too bad? Too bad is a model of who he was. I think who he is much nicer than who he was. I don't think it's too bad at all. Now, that's pushing the edge a little bit. Can you hear? I mean, I really want to push things a little bit with us. So when I talk about perfection, I'm saying open to just what is. And that fellow today suffers much less when he just allows what is to be for the moment. He can still do his visualizations. He can work to change it. But the holding that discrepancy between what is and what he wishes were is constantly creating suffering. And for all of us, continually. Another thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to try to be cohesive. I'd like to just play a little bit tonight and talk about things as they come to my mind. Is this all right, the way I'm doing this? Is that our attachment to our senses, our seeing, our hearing, our smelling, our touching, our tasting, and to our thinking mind, our thinking. These are the vehicles through which we're used to receiving information. And they keep us focused on form all the time, on things. And because we live in a world of form or things, we tend to think of ourselves as form and things. And there is a very deep Western predisposition to identify with your thoughts and think you are your thoughts. That who you think you are is who you are. Okay. Now, just imagine that you are a large blob, and that one tiny bit of that blob is form. And there is another part, a much larger part, that is formless. But how would you know about it? You can't hear it. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't touch it. You can't even think about it, because thinking, by its nature, thinks about something. It takes an object. And what this part of you that has no form is, it's not an object. So how would you know of its existence? And if you are totally attached to the fact that the only way you can know about what is through your senses and your thinking mind, you decide that part of you that has no form isn't. Now, this is a very, this is about as deep as mysticism gets, actually. Like when Einstein said, and I've quoted this many times, when he said, "I didn't arrive at my understanding of the primary laws of the universe, those relationships, through my rational mind." What I understand him to have meant was that he went beyond his thinking mind and beyond his sense experiences. And he went into, here's where the words start to fall apart. He went into some way of being with what is. Heinlein talks about it as grokking, where you become one with it. There's no longer subject-object. There's no longer thinking about. There's no longer relationship. It is as if I am it. He became E equals mc squared. And then he came back and he articulated it because he was a physicist. In the same way Bach went and became music and then comes back and imperfectly, pretty good, but still what comes to the human ear isn't the divine sound. He articulates the Brandenburg Concerti or whatever, or Mozart or Da Vinci or Michelangelo or Picasso. Blake. It feels to me very much like we are like the drunk the image that's very familiar by now to everyone. It's been used so much. The drunk who's looking for the watch under the streetlight, and everybody says, they help him, and then they say, well, where'd you lose the watch? And he's set up in the alley. They say, well, why aren't you looking there? He says, because there's more light here. But you don't find the watch. And the thing is, when you keep looking for the deepest truths of your being through your senses and your thinking mind, because that's what you're used to using, you don't find what you're looking for. And you always feel like you're one thought away from where the action is. You always feel slightly cut off from being in the moment, being here fully. Because it is not what here is. I mean, and yet, what's bizarre is we are all functioning with that intuitive, non-conceptual information all the time. But we have no way of noticing that we're doing it. And therefore, we relegate it to irrelevance. Is this too weird, or are you hearing what I'm saying? I mean, I am convinced now in these studies that show how many people had mystical experiences. Staggering numbers of people have had mystical experiences, but most of them have treated them as irrelevant or trivial, or I was out of my mind, or I was drunk, or I didn't know what happened, or I went to the movie and I was confused, or whatever. They have ways of denigrating it, of treating it as irrelevant, because they cannot gain conceptual control of it. They can't get control of it with their minds all the time. Now, what is scary is when you recognize that the vast part of yourself is not conceptual and is not knowable by the usual methods of knowing, that in a sense you can be it, but you can't know it. It's like the Tao says, the student learns by daily increments. You learn a little each day. The way is gained by daily loss. Loss upon loss until, the way. You clean away the conceptual structures. You clean them away, you clean them away, you clean them away until it's like regaining innocence or having innocence. The innocence of being just with what is, without the conceptual overlay, without the control that comes from knowing you know. I mean, look at how wedded we are to science as a religion, which says what we want to do is build a body of knowledge so we know we know. But what happens if the major stuff of which are happiness and ultimate survival and existence, if that is rooted in something that you can't know you know? What are we going to do? What if it is not amenable to the scientific method? What are we going to do then? Should we reject it? Or is it possible for us to train ourselves, to discipline ourselves, to go beyond our own mind, our own thinking mind, to go beyond our own attachment to our senses and our thinking mind? Is it possible for us? See, Western cognitive psychology doesn't deal with this at all, by the way. It talks about what you think about. It assumes an identity between you and the thinker. Cogito ergo sum. But just imagine now, how are you going to get through to that part of yourself which is not knowable by your mind, by your thinking mind, by your analytic intellect? Without putting your intellect down, it's a beautiful servant, but a lousy master. And you treat it as a master most of the time in order to sort of control the universe. It's wonderful to be able to think. It's too bad if you can't stop it. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. You can't stop it. When after some years of spiritual practice, when I started to not think, my first reaction, having been when I was a professor at Harvard, thinking was the stuff I got paid for. And I remember, I couldn't waste time not thinking. I remember flying, and I had a little Cessna airplane, and I was flying across the United States, and I had a clipboard on my thigh so I could write down significant thoughts while I was flying, so I wouldn't waste time flying and not thinking all the time, because I could think up research proposals to put into NIMH. And when I first started to not think, when I first would have these moments where I just was, my mind was empty. When I started to think again, the first thought was, uh-oh, I took too many drugs. I think I've blown my brain. There it goes. Too bad. Oh, God. Well, they were right. They were right after all. And I got frightened because ever since I was a child, I was taught thinking is better. Think more, you're better. And your analytic mind can solve all problems. And look what a mess it has created for us. Look what a mess it creates. Because it doesn't recognize the deeper harmony that exists and the deeper unity that exists across peoples and between us and nature, all those levels. It just doesn't do it. It tries to figure it all out, and look what it does. Every act it does to try to heal it, it keeps creating more problems. And at first, when I started not to notice I wasn't thinking, I got frightened, as you can see. And then I remember going through the next stage where I thought, well, if that's what's happened, that's what's happened. I've blown my mind. What am I going to not worry about it? I mean, that's the way it is. I'll just be sort of a dull normal from here on in, and I'll just be whatever it is that I'm going to be from here on in. And then I began to notice that even though my mind was empty, when something was necessary, when I wasn't too frightened to block it and flicker, if I just trusted it, when I needed it, it was there, without my constantly rehearsing it all the time. I mean, I used to get down the street, and you'd look and you'd say, there's books, and there's a camera, and there's, a shoe, and there's a tree, and there's a car. I mean, your mind is constantly doing that. You're constantly reassuring yourself you know that the world is out there the way you think it is. And your mind can't stop. It's like this incredible addiction to labeling so you think you know where you are in this complete. And it's really whistling in the dark. And what's so frightening about dying for many people is that they are going to lose the control of their thinking mind. They can't think their way through that one. And they know that at some point their thinking mind's going to let go. And then what? And that's why in the Eastern traditions, you spend your life learning how to extricate yourself from your thinking mind and from your identification with your senses, so that at the moment of death, there isn't that panic of loss of control because you've already died. And when Christ said, lest ye die, ye cannot be born again, we're talking about that. We're talking about dying into who you think you are, the dying of who you think you are, then you are what you are. This is very weird stuff I'm saying, and I mean, if you would just walked in from outside, it would sound like a course in psychosis by a case. I remember speaking at Einstein Medical School once. A young Turk psychiatrist invited me to speak there. Some years back, and I had a beard, and I was wearing a dress, and I had a lot of beads. And the grand rounds where I was speaking, it turned out that they alternated days. They had a speaker, and then the next day they'd present a case, and then they'd have a speaker and present a case. So I came in and all the chairs were very narrow, so the only comfortable place for me to sit like this was on the conference table. So I sat on the conference table. And I watched these old Viennese psychiatrists come in, psychoanalysts, and I could see they looked at me, and I could feel they thought, gee, I must have obviously this is the case, So seeing their predicament, I presented myself as a case. I talked about how he took psychotropic chemicals and had hallucinations, which is the way they'd say it. And They kept nodding until they realized the patient was presenting itself. It was sort of weird. Now, just the models of, like, who am I? Who am I? For example, Ramana Maharshi, one of the great Indian saints, teaches something called Vichara Atma, which is the form of what's called neti neti, which means not that, not that. And he says, he helps you, if you've got the discipline of mind, which is a form of what's called jnana yoga, you are able to extricate yourself from identification with each thing. Like, for example, I am not this arm. And then you just see the arm as an object. You don't see it as me. It's just that arm. And so you say, I am not my organs of motion. I am not my organs, my inner organs. And you go through step by step. In each case, you extricate yourself from identification with that. I am not my feelings. I am not. You're pulling back and back and back. And the last one is, I am not this thought. Which thought? The thought, I am not this thought, which is the last one you got. See? And that's like climbing up a tree and then out on a branch and then out on a twig and then cutting off the twig, you see. Usually your mind flicks at that point, you're back being your body. I mean, it's very hard. It's a tough discipline to do jnana yoga. And in a way, when the Zen koan, where you're confronted with something that your rational mind can't solve, is another way of jnana yoga, of forcing you to go beyond your thinking mind, to go outside of it. So what is the sound of one hand clapping, or how do you know your Buddha nature through the sound of a cricket, or whatever? And you keep trying, your mind keeps wrestling with it. I mean, when I was taking the Rohatsu Dai Sesshin, a 9-day hell course, where you got 5 times a day, you go into the master, doctor, how you know your Buddha nature through sound of cricket? And you say anything, whatever. And oh, doctor, I am so disappointed in you. I had such hopes for you. You seemed so promising. So, and he rings your bell and you dismiss and you go crushed back to you. And you got to run back to your sitting mat, sit like this. And if you wobble, they beat you. It's really quite intense. And I got sick and it was cold and miserable and I hated all of them and I hated me and I was trying to escape and I couldn't think of how to get out of it with a safe face. And about the 5th day when I was running a fever and I was absolutely miserable, I was walking up to the interview with another lame thing I'd thought up to say. And I finally thought, screw it. I don't really care. And I looked around and everything was radiant and beautiful. And I walked in, doctor, how you know your Buddha nature through sound of cricket? Good morning, Roshi. Now you are becoming beginning student of Zen. It was the moment of letting go of the mind and just, this moment here, I am first time I've seen you today, good morning. I can't use it the second time. You can't go in, good afternoon, Roshi. You can only milk it once, but it's... Yeah. You'll forget. Now, what I've been doing recently is doing Vipassana meditation with a Burmese master. I just got back from Hawaii last week, where I was sitting for 10 days, and last summer I sat for 2 months in a monastery in Burma, Rangoon. And in that monastery, you figure from 3 in the morning till 11 at night, you are sitting in your cell, following the muscle rising and falling in your abdomen. Every time you breathe in, it does something and you note it rising. Every time you breathe out, you note it falling. what you are doing by doing that is you're picking a primary object. You're picking a thing. It's like taking the mind, which is used to having the freedom to go here and grab this and think that and feel this and sense that and touch that and remember this and plan that and all that stuff. And the mind's always going that. And that's what gives you your solidity of your universe. And it's happening so fast, it always seems solid. It's like a movie film in which the frames, all of which are dissociated, but if they go by fast enough, it seems like there's a real being there doing something. And so we keep reinforcing everything. I mean, it's just flickering around. There's just so much information all the time, and your awareness is just flickering from thing to thing. Because you're only thinking one thing at a time, it turns out. Your awareness is only focused on one thing at a time. But it goes so fast. It goes at the rate, Buddha said it went at the rate of 1 trillion per blink of an eye. That's pretty fast. Now, that is only fast from the time dimension that your mind is in, it turns out. I mean, this is really playing now with what's called living time. Hold that for a moment, I'll come back to it. So you take a primary object, it's like taking a wild elephant and tying one of those rings around its foot and a cable and then putting a stake in the ground, and you're going to bring the elephant down, you're going to tame it to carry logs or whatever. And your mind isn't used to having any controls on it at all. And all your rule is, you've made an agreement, you've come there, and you've made a conscious, intentional choice that you are going to try to keep your mind fixed on this little muscle going up and down from 3 in the morning until 11 at night, every day, for 2 months. 7 days a week, 4 hours of sleep, 2 meals, one at 5:30 in the morning, one at 11, nothing afternoon, nothing but water. Nobody to talk to, no books to read, no notes to take, no place to hide. And you're under a vow of truth, and each time you go in to report to the teacher, you tell how many hours you've been doing it in the past 24 hours. So that if you figure you can go to the bathroom and take an hour off and think about the stock market, or think about the international situation, or think about your relationships, or think about what the hell you're doing here, you can't do it because you're wasting time. You're going to take it out of your sleeping time. Otherwise, you weren't meditating. So you're cornered like a rat. I mean, you just got to do it. And you're doing this voluntarily, you understand. I mean, nobody's doing this to you. It's incredible. And I saw how slimy my mind was. I mean, it is so slithery. You try to get it to stay somewhere, and it goes there, and then it goes, whoop, and then slithers here and slithers there, and then it begins to think about meditation. That's a good one. That sucks you in. And there are all these ways you watch how creative the mind is in keeping you being somebody doing something. Because if you were only following rising and falling of the breath, where would you be, since you're a thought? Finally, there is only the rising and the falling of the breath. That's all there is in the universe. There isn't even you watching your breath rising and falling, which is a thought about it. And so you do this for a long time, and first your mind stays there, and then it goes off, and pretty soon, I mean, years back when I started to do this meditation 12 years ago, I could go off and I could have a 6-hour fantasy, a 6-hour sexual fantasy, sitting in Burma all by myself in a cell. I mean, and it was just with great detail and the subtleties of the rustle of silk and all the, every little thing and the smells and the images and the shadows. And what was the rush? I wasn't going anywhere. I had weeks to meditate, and I'd look like I was meditating all the time, and nobody knew, and I would have these 6-hour things, it was like having an orgy of, or I'd plan when I became famous, and, I'd have those things. When I became like the Buddha, what would I do, and I'd have long fantasies of what I would be, how compassionate I'd be. Oh, God. But then, after a while, you see the finiteness of the creation of all this stuff. All of it turns out to be finite, and it's not interesting enough. I mean, the worst thing is to live out how you thought it was going to be. I mean, you look at your life, and the exciting part is that it's always slightly different. It always stretches. It's always better because it's more than you imagined it would be, even at your best imagination. Fantasy isn't nearly as great as what is. Now, I used to read fantasy. I used to read science fiction and Le Carre and all those kind of things. I mean, I used to read I was addicted to them. And then I realized that my life was so rich. Why would I go there? And this was so much more, so much more, so much more. So after a number of years, my mind quiets down and it finally gets interested in actually doing this thing of keeping the mind focused. But the mind keeps going off and I feel like I am struggling to keep it focused. And I'm angry at the method for entrapping me. And then there's some point, this was about 2 years ago, when after about 4 weeks of this, I thought, I'm on the wrong side of this game. I'm identifying with the wild mind rather than with the one-pointed mind. And something released in me, and I just started to go to the one point and just started to stay there. And I began to feel like that was home. Now, you got to remember, this is all what's known as samadhi. In the Buddhist sense, there is Shila, Panya, and Samadhi are the three components. Shila is purifications, Samadhi is concentration, and Panya is wisdom. And you kind of keep working with these three things. So Samadhi is concentration, and you get your mind so it will stay on one point. This is only the beginning. This is the doorway in, by the way. This isn't the thing itself. There's no big deal about keeping the mind in one place, except to do that, you have broken the identification with all the other thoughts in order to do that. Okay. You with me? I mean, you hear what I'm saying? Now, once the mind becomes laser-like and starts to stay there, all the other thoughts and senses and feelings, they hang around at the periphery. I remember them being like those little bugs around a light. They just kind of flickering around there. They don't come in and take over because you don't let them do it, but they're just flickering around the edge, and your mind is just staying, rising, falling, rising, rising. And there are stages where you feel peace like you never felt peace before. And I remember going to my teacher, meditation teacher once, and saying, oh, thank you, I finally got it. I feel this peace, this incredible peace. Oh, that's what I've always yearned for. Oh, it's so wonderful. And he, sharply attuned as he is to spiritual materialism, said to me, how lovely, now go back and follow the rising and falling of your breath. Get on with it. Because each time you stop along the way to smell the pretty flower, ooh, bliss, ooh, rapture, ooh, powers, back to the breath. Oh, but I can do so much good with those powers. Back to the breath. And you got many choices to step off the trolley, believe me. Well, I think I got enough of this. This is really good. I mean, I really do good with this. I mean, the difference between where my consciousness is now and where it was a year ago or where it was 2 years ago, as the result of the sadhana I've been doing in the past 2 years, is so dramatically different. I mean, I'm speaking now from a place of such deeper being, my being, than I have spoken from in the past. I can feel it. I know it. I mean, it may sound crazier. I don't know what it sounds like out there, but inside it's feeling really strong. And there's a tendency to say, well, gee, with this, look at what I can do. And there is where the delicacy is, because you've got to balance. Do I get off the trolley here and go do it, or do I put it back in the hopper and run it through the blender again? So you come back, and then once the mind gets one-pointed, it becomes like a laser, and it starts to slice into reality. It starts to cut into the universe. And some of the things you see that are stages that they describe. For example, I'll just give you a couple examples because it's such a complex body of knowledge about this. I mean, if the Buddhist Tripitaka, the analysis of the way the human mind works is so evolved. I mean, to me, it makes Western psychology look like like Tinker Toys or, you come to a point where, for example, when I look at this camera, I see something that's dark and shape and the arms and all of this. I see all this. Now, how do I know that those are arms and camera? It all happens so quickly that when I look, I don't any longer just see shadow, dark, light, form. I see camera and arms on the camera. I already apply the apperception, the conceptual overlay. I do it all so quickly most of the time. And what happens as you get your mind focused in is you get to the point where you begin to see the separate thoughts starting to arise, exist, and pass away. Arise, exist, and pass away. Arise, exist, and pass away. And sometimes you only see the arising of thoughts. You see them all. Everywhere you look, it comes into play. Those of you that have taken drugs may recognize that moment where it's what Christ said. He says, look, I'm making all things new. It's like you're creating the universe. Everywhere you look, you see that you are creating stuff. You're not creating the thing. You are creating the form of it by your mind creating, going out and doing it. And you see the creation everywhere. That's seeing the beginning of thoughts. Then there's another place where you're just focusing on the middle of thoughts, and it's like nothing ever is going to change. It's all static. Everything's stopped. Everywhere you look, it's stopped. It's like nothing's happening. It's all stopped. And then the third stage is where you see everything dying and decaying and falling away. And everywhere you look, it's decaying and dying, decaying and dying. And that's what it feels like. Tremendous despair and pain. Now, these are all stages, and they're articulated in the literature, and it's very standard stuff. And the teacher is a person who's been listening to human minds for 35 years, and he knows exactly what stage you're at when you walk in and say, this happened in my meditation. And he just sees a walking mind. I don't know what he sees, but I mean, that's what he's dealing with, is a walking mind. And he keeps moving you through. And Buddha describes, for example, the last 32 mind moments, trillion per blink of an eye, the last 32 before you go into the nibbanic state, which is the space between two thoughts. Because between two thoughts, there is no universe. It's what's called the void, or nibbana. And it's the ground on which all the forms and thoughts rest. It's the sky in which all the clouds are passing. And as you start to deal with that state in your being, you're finally doing what I started out talking about recognizing the part of you that is not conceptual. The part of you that is not informed. And look at what a circuitous route. Sitting in Burma, in the cell, bringing the mind, following the breath, getting the mind down at one point, sharpening it so it becomes like a laser, so it can go through, so it doesn't keep being at the whim of conceptual mind until you can get through, and you can go through until you get what's called the vipassana jnanas, or the insights that follow naturally. Because all the things that the Buddha teaches about suffering and the cause of suffering and the end of suffering, the things he teaches about anicca, or everything's changing, dukkha, that there is suffering, anatta, there's no self, all that stuff you can learn theoretically, conceptually, by reading philosophy books of Buddhism. But what Buddha says is don't read them, do it. You find out like I found out, because finally you're only free when you've experienced the stuff directly, not when you've just read about it. And I am finally driven to meditation. Not out of, oh my God, I've got to do it, but wow, look at this method and it'll work for me. I can do this. Now, the interesting thing, I should stop. I just want to say one more little thing here. That my primary method, as those of you that have read Miracle of Love know, my primary method is my relation to my guru. It's my love of my guru. Now, a lot in the West, that's a really weird thing to say, especially since he's dead. So I got like an imaginary playmate in the Western image. having a friend that is incredibly funny, incredibly wise, incredibly hip, a cosmic player, a rascal, who you hang out with all the time. And he's right here now. He's not here in an astral form sitting on the flowers. I just feel that quality of being in this moment. Now, I used to have him as an old man in a blanket. And after he died, I had the memory of him as an old man in a blanket. And I remember he said this, and then he said that, and then he pulled my beard, and then he did this. And I wrote a book about all the things he did and said when he was an old man in a blanket. But now he isn't an old man in a blanket anymore. He's there too. But he's just this presence. He's this quality of being. And what I found 12 years ago when I used to meditate is that after I huffed and puffed and followed my breath for 10 days or 20 days or 30 days, I'd end up feeling like I was distant from my guru and that my heart was scrunched and dry, and I'd want a bhakti hit. I want to sing Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. And I just want to go back into the space of my love, of my heart, and the sweetness, and the singing to God, and the play, and thinking of the little delights when I'd reach for his foot and he'd pull it back under the blanket, and all the little diddly things about relationship. And I'd say, oh, phew, boy, was I dry. And now, 12, 15 years later, when I meditate, the quieter I get, the deeper my mind goes, the closer I am to him. Now we meet in the place. Now I'm meeting Shiva. Those of you that understand the Hindu tradition understand what I'm talking about. You meet the formless that's in form. You meet that part of yourself that has nothing to do with who you think you are, what you're sensing, thinking, remembering. It has nothing to do with growing old. It has nothing to do with being born or dying. There's no going, there's no coming. When Hakuin the Zen poet says, your going and coming is nowhere but where you are. I mean, I get on a plane in Hawaii, Honolulu, and I end up in San Francisco. And then I'll get on a plane in a couple of days and I'll go to Boston. And then I go on a plane and I go to Nepal. And I go, where am I going? Plane is flying and flying and flying. It's doing its thing. And I'm right here. And I'm here, and now I'm here, and now I'm here, and now I'm here. If I'm busy defining myself as somebody that's coming and going, it's exhausting. But there is nowhere to go. It's like Ramana Maharshi when he's dying and all his devotees say, don't leave us, don't leave us. He says, don't be silly, where can I go? I mean, I'm only dying. It's no big deal. I'm just dropping my body. The minute you recognize that part of your being that isn't in time and space, Swami Ram Tirth says, I am without form, without limit, beyond space, beyond time. I am in everything, everything is in me. Now that all sounds from a logical, analytic point of view like absolutely that guy should be locked up. From a mystical point of view, that's a beautiful expression of who we are much more than who we thought we are. So what we're facing here when we come together in consciousness studies, and we come together to consider the issues of relationship, of nuclear holocaust, of what we're going to do in the world and all, is that in the terms of keeping our eye on the mark, we do what we must do in the world, but we don't forget that it is all an exercise to awaken out of the illusion created by our own mind, because the more we are free of the illusion in our own mind, the less we will suck other people into the illusion. And if you really want to end suffering, the way to end suffering is end your own suffering, and the way to end your own suffering is to extricate yourself from the illusion of your own mind, created by your own mind. And once you are free of that, then you have a chance to free another person. When I sit with that person, that fellow this afternoon with AIDS, I am working on myself to keep myself spacious and present and clear and not get caught in the heavy melodrama of a beautiful young man dying. And if I can do that, and just see the unfolding of law and keep my heart open in love and be with just what is, I can be an instrument, as happened this afternoon, of the release of his suffering, although for a moment. So that when people said, well, the 70s was the me generation, they don't understand that that was as direct a route to compassionate action as there could be. Because much of the action that was done, and this is my dialogue with Dan Ellsberg, that much of my dialogue, much of the issue about social action is very often, I mean, I don't know that I said it in that because I wasn't watching all of it. I don't quite remember what was edited into the film. But what I said, what I know is that the way in which we dealt with the Vietnam War put Reagan in the White House. Now, Reagan's a good president in certain ways and a horrible president in others, and we don't have to do a political thing. But what I'm saying is there is a pendulum swing that when you do things in a certain attached way, you create you give juice to the whole polarity all the time. And what we have developed is, in this me generation and all these years, is a certain sophistication, I hope, that consciousness studies, the work on oneself, to become an instrument for the relief of suffering, so you got to do it on all levels at once. I'm now chairman of the board of the Savor Foundation. Yesterday I was at the board meeting. I just finished the week-long board meeting. We just gave away, I don't know, $600,000 for blindness in Nepal and blindness in India and reforestation in Africa and Costa Rica and trades, crafts for the Guatemalan refugees and health clinics for the American Indians. And it's incredible. I mean, it's just for me to realize that I just went to Nepal as the chairman of the board of the Savor Foundation on a fact-finding mission and to inspire the whole thing and to see what's going on and to meet with the government officials about getting policies, in fact, in place that would do more cataract operations per year. And I put on my blue blazer and my necktie, and I am the chairman of the board. And I think at some point, what am I doing? I mean, a few years ago I was in a dress, and here I am in a tie and a jacket going over, and how do you do? And people see me coming as an NGO director, a non-governmental organization. We have a contract with the king of Nepal. We're like the Red Cross or something like that. We're a real thing. I'm the chairman of the board. The chairman of the board of the Red Cross. We're building a hospital in Nepal. We've got jeeps and offices and people examining eyes and doctors doing surgery that we're importing from here and there. It's like a big production. And the chairman of the board is coming. You got the image? I mean, if you're a Nepali official, how do you do? And I thought, gee, if I can lose the spirit, this is when I'm going to lose it. Because they're going to take me seriously. And they are not the kind that I can tell, hey, I'm really not the chairman of the board. I mean, now that there are no adults here, we can really play, I can't quite say that, you see. And I found out I didn't have to. I could just look into their eyes and we could talk about stuff and I could disagree with them. And I just loved them so much that pretty soon it all just turned into, I don't know what. It was like satsang. It was like having darshan of spiritual beings all the time. I came back from that trip higher than I went. And it was a great teaching to me. What I'm trying to learn now, and I'm studying, and I hope to write about it and talk about it and just keep analyzing how to do it, is to enunciate karma yoga much more effectively in our society. That is the yoga of doing what you do and doing it in a way of becoming free. Because when I left Rangoon last summer, I was in a very delicate state of mind. The telegram came, my stepmother had cancer, I had to come home. I came home and I decided to throw myself into service because my guru had said, when I said, how do I get enlightened? He said, feed people. How do I know God? Serve people. I decided, all right, I'm just going to throw myself in totally to feeding and serving people. Everybody that calls upon me, I'm going to say yes. Till I physically don't have any more space. 7 days a week, all the time. My father, AIDS patients, seva, fundraising, therapy cases, working with the aged were ... Sure, yes, of course. Oh, yes, you'd like me to write this? Of course. Yes, yes, of course. Till every minute of every day, from the minute I wake up till I go to bed, just more of it. Gonna burn out. Why? What burns out? That's the interesting one. Do you have to burn out? Why can't you get juiced from it? You don't burn out from meditation. Why should you burn out from karma yoga? You only burn out when your mind has expectations and models. That's what burns out. If you don't have any model, what's to burn? Only models burn. Far out. So all year I thought, well, I'll see if it'll work. I'm not even going to meditate. I'm not going to contaminate it. I'm going to do it as a pure yoga. By the spring, I was like, I can make it through to the next meditation course. I think I'm losing it. What do you mean you want me to do something? Don't you know I'm busy? I was really losing it, you know. Oh, damn it, I got to go to that meeting. And I went back to sit with this teacher just last week or 2 weeks ago. And I was full of, I'm going to face a teacher for whom meditation is the thing in life. I'm one of his students, and I spent a whole year and I haven't meditated. I mean, you talk about guilt. You know, it's not guilt. It's just figuring how I can cover it, you know. See? But you're under a vow of truth, so you can't quite do it, see? So I got to go in, and I figure, oh, boy, I'm back at square one, and I sit down and meditate. Within one day, I am right back where I was at the edge when I left Burma the year before. And I think, gee, it's working. It's beginning to work. It'll work. It's much harder to stay high when you're in the marketplace. But when you really get to a certain point where you only want to be free, you use the marketplace to get free. Kabir says, Kabir or Rumi, Kabir said, I go into the marketplace, but I'm not a purchaser. I don't want to buy anything. You want power, you want sex, you want money. Sure, it's all right to want them, but are you attached to the wanting of them? You attached to the getting of them? Therein lies burnout. You do, what happens, happens, no burnout. But that is another topic for another time. Thank you, that's good. I mean, I think I covered a lot of territory thus far. You want to stretch for a couple of minutes and then let's do some questions and answers? Is that okay? A discussion? Is that all right, Joseph? Here we go.
Excuse me, one of those announcements, the white Malibu, TKF 334, your lights are on.
I saw that person come. I'm not sure they're part of this group. I tried to find that person before, and then I decided they weren't part of this group, but I may be wrong.
Maybe it is.
Okay. Are we ready?
Okay, Brent.
Here we go. We don't seem to have a Joseph. Where is he?
Oh, can I make an announcement about the microphone? Don over here is holding the microphone. As people want to ask questions, Don's going to come towards you with that microphone, so I'm cooperating. Can you pick up this side of the house with that?
Wouldn't somebody do better at being in the middle somewhere?
Maybe, yeah. John, where should Don put that? Can people on this side of the house be picked up by him?
I'll repeat the questions too. That'll help.
Thank you. And should people stand to ask their questions? Yes, so if everybody would stand to ask questions, that would be really helpful.
Okay. This is the part of the evening that is called the Answer Man, which we make believe you have questions and we make believe I have answers. Knowing full well that we all know the answers and we all know the questions, and we've been asking them in the cave for thousands of years until we're done. Questions? Yes.
One of the issues that I play with, or struggle with, or work with, is the one of, as a psychotherapist, just being with a client in the way that you described, being with the person with AIDS, versus all the theory that I had to learn, which doesn't seem nearly as helpful at times. And I wondered what your thoughts were about the interplay of those two aspects.
It's the same. Do you all hear the question? Does that get on? Do I have to repeat that, or is that all right? Okay. It's the same question of what is the relation between the intellect and the intuitive listening heart-mind. The thing called the heart-mind, heart-mind, is that all the theoretical structure you learn and you feed in, and you feed it in as deeply as you can. And then when you are in the situation, you empty and listen. And to the extent that that stuff is real and valid in the situation, it will, if you trust it, it will arise and guide the way you respond. You won't forget it all. You don't have to keep it in mind. The problem with having a theory is that oftentimes it comes between you and the person. Like somebody walks in and you say schizophrenic. You don't see another being like yourself. You immediately categorize and label in order to be efficient, you think. But in that efficiency, you lose the connection between you and the being. And that quality of heart merging that happens from emptiness that's where compassion is that heals. So that you learn the stuff and learn it and then trust that it's in there and walk in empty, and then it will arise as it's appropriate. I mean, I was a psychotherapist and learned all that stuff. And I haven't studied it for 25 years, and it's, of course, changed in some ways and not in others. But I noticed that when I sit down with somebody and I listen, what comes out is some kind of amalgam of old psychotherapy and spiritual perspectives, and it all keeps coming out in new forms and new ways, because what is in there is really in there. And I trust it now. I don't have to rehearse it and think about what psychosexual stage of development this person is in, or, what kind of ego weaknesses and strengths. I don't have to rehearse it because it's there, and it will arise. So it all has to do with how ripe you are to learn something and how intuitively valid it ultimately is. It's a very delicate balancing, Questions, yes?
I have a problem between this concept of letting go and also being exactly where I am, especially when I'm in a space that I don't like. I'd like you to say something about that, please.
Say a little more what you mean by letting go.
Well, when choosing to let go of an attachment, for instance, or just being exactly where I am with the attachment.
Okay, there. Now I'm hearing it. All right. Attachment, letting go of the attachment, or... See, the first stage is honoring what you are. I'm a human, there are attachments, and it hurts. Okay. That's the first thing. Opening to what is, not what you wish were. You wish you were attached, but you are. But that's the first stage of it. It's a funny thing, you can't give up attachments like that, because as you try to push something away, it sticks to you. You're busy giving up attachment. Like, I'm not going to be attached, which is an attachment. But what happens is you do it obliquely. You honor what is, and then you kind of deepen the understanding of yourself as something else. through your study, through your meditations, through your spiritual practices, and then slowly the attachments fall away like the skin of a snake. It falls away. And what you do is you turn and face the attachment and examine it. And you look for that little thread of awareness in you that isn't attached. It's always there. There's always a little thread that's just noticing the attachment, saying, boy, look how attached I am. That part of it isn't attached. That's just noticing. All the rest of you, 99% is attached. Don't leave me, don't leave me. And 1% is saying, boy, look at that attachment. And you cultivate that little thread. If you try to deny the attachment, that's a defense mechanism. That doesn't work. So don't confuse non-attachment with dissociation or that kind of defense of detachment that's pushing away something. You honor that this is part. I mean, I honor that I have desires. The question is, do I identify fully with those desires or not? Doesn't mean I don't have the desires. When somebody they love dies, they experience grief. That's a human condition. At the same moment, you can cultivate the equanimity of mind that allows you to have perspective about the grief. It doesn't mean the grief isn't there. There's a monk whose son has died, and I think Stephen Levine uses the example, and somebody, I think I actually used it in How Can I Help? And somebody comes and says, why are you crying? You're such a high, wise monk. And he says, well, everything is illusion, and the death of a child is the greatest illusion. And it's just an illusion, and it hurts. And you don't make believe you're not human. You don't get holy by making believe. You allow yourself, you look at it, and then you cultivate that little part of you that is also there. Besides the attachment, there's another part of you that hears me perfectly clearly. Yes?
Would you ever have any mic trouble with that, like, with that, like,
I will repeat the questions, yes.
I have really two questions. One is, can an undisciplined person get into the state? And it seems to me you're required to just be consistent in moving along in a certain direction so that the approaches of fundamental stage meditate once every 6 weeks or go about it as most will do a lot of we're not going to make you do that.
The question is, if you don't have much discipline, can you proceed spiritually if you're just doing it as a kind of a hit or miss or now and then kind of operation? There isn't any route through to freedom. You might hear what I'm saying and be so right that in a moment you're way ahead of me. There isn't a rule. You don't have to go through 9 steps and everybody has to go through the 9 steps. That's nonsense. I mean, there are stories of saints like Ramana Maharshi. He was a 17-year-old kid. He wasn't even a spiritual kid. And suddenly he just had this experience that felt he was dying, and he said, okay, I'll die, and he just went into another state, and he was free. I mean, so that it has to do with your karma. It's not necessarily how much gung-ho meditation you do. I'm merely describing a method. It is not the method. It is a method, although the people who teach it think it's the method. People always do, but it's just a method. Second question.
Are they dying out as such these older gurus and teachers, or are there more and more of these people of that type of quality that you do?
Yeah, are the gurus dying out? I hear the question. It's a very valid question. I have a feeling it's a little like the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna says that I embody myself from time to time as is needed. And that as long as there is need for such beings, that need will force the creation or the bringing down of such beings. And that from my understanding of an evolutionary process, there are beings just entering the pool of separate entities, and there are beings that are nearly done, and they keep coming by. So I think there's going to be a continuous supply. The question of whether or not the culture will support the noticing of them. See, that's the interesting thing. I mean, when you live in the villages I live in India, they live in the world where there are gurus. I mean, the family I live in has had 4 different gurus in the course of all of their lifetimes. And they were all like my guru. They were all incredibly high beings. And I look and I'm jealous, but the culture there supported those beings being recognized, honored, realized. Here, if somebody's a guru, I mean, there's, you know, but what do you do for a living? You know, it's not supported. Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening. It is. Yes.
I'm playing with the idea of no expectations, particularly letting go of expectations of the planet being saved. And to follow along the lines that you've been speaking, when my meditation teacher announces there's 1 minute left in meditation, it intensifies my mindfulness and my awareness of my breath, of what's present. And I wonder, what are your thoughts about what is the breath or the pulse of the planet that I can put my awareness on, since I've been told, and I believe perhaps, that there's 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 year left.
I think that right effort, does that question come through all right? Yes. Okay. I think that right effort is very important, and that thought is very powerful, and that it is certainly possible to affect the universe through thought. And Christ said, had ye faith, you could move mountains. And I think that's true. You can do it with your thought. I mean, I'm talking about literally. I'm not talking figuratively. The question is, how do you cultivate the kind of power of thought that actually changes something? And from my understanding, that thought is cultivated, as I was telling Dan in the videotape, by being so at peace with what is, that you are thinking about the peace of the planet and the release of paranoia and fear in the culture. But you are doing it from such a quiet, present place that there is not flickeriness in your mind that's created by your own fear about it ending, or your own loss of equanimity into urgency. I got to do something about this. I mean, I think you would, hearing what you're saying, you would meditate in the sense of sending out that kind of thought form to create peace and presence and clarity and consciousness in decision making, and surround public officials with those kind of thoughts, and do all that with your mind. And you would do it because that's what you do, because you have heard what your dharma is, which is a very clear concept about doing what is appropriate for you to do to honor your incarnation. And your incarnation is a member of an ecosphere, and a member of a nation state, and a member of a world culture, and a member of a surviving species, and all those have responsibilities in them. And you don't do them out of ought or should or heavy or my God, what may happen. You do it because that's what you do. For years, I thought when my brother says to me, gee, aren't you great to be taking care of Dad? He's seeing it as some kind of thing that has to be done. I'm not experiencing it from that place. I'm seeing it as that's what I do. Perfectly light, just like I breathe, and I take care of Dad. And I would make a statement about anti-nuclear consciousness, and make a statement about the American Indians at the Four Corners, and so on. And I feel just a part of the universe and an appropriateness of response. But it's coming from a very quiet presence, so that my vibration that I'm putting into the universe is feeding exactly the thing I'm trying to bring about. Because to the extent that I act out of fear, I am reinforcing the fear out of which the bomb is being built. No, you do it because you're doing it. Like I am, there's a story of the rabbi who every morning came out of his house and he walked across in this little Polish village. He walked across, or Russian village. He walked across the the village square to the shul, to daven, to prayer. And he'd done that for 20 years. And one morning, you know the story, one morning the Cossacks coming by and he says, "Good morning, Rabbi, where are you going?" And the rabbi says, "God only knows." And the Cossack figures, what kind of a wise guy is this? He shouldn't say that, I'm a Cossack. And he arrests him. And he throws him into prison for being flip. And the wife of the rabbi comes and says, "What did you do? What did you do?" He says, "I just said, who knows? God only knows. I didn't know I was going to end up in prison." Okay? Yet he was walking to shul, but without expectation, because he walks to shul. And you end up I'm doing what I'm doing now. What happens to you is what happens to you. I'm doing this because this is what I do. And this is appropriate for me to do at this moment. Can you see what I'm saying? And it's appropriate for us to bless and to bring peace and to become, as Sri Aurobindo talks about, conduits of spirit coming to earth. It's appropriate for us to keep purifying and allowing that thing to come through us. What happens is what happens. Is that dealing with the question? In relation to that, there is the Big Mountain Sundance, these are critical times for the American Indians, as you know. And on July 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, there are going to be some prayers and meditation vigils. And all they're asking is that 30-minute prayer and meditation at the time that the sacred tree of life is raised in the center of the arbor, making the beginning of the Sundance. And just to help, this is a very critical year, and if you can use your thoughts and your heart to help in this Sundance to try to clarify things a little bit before the Indians are taken from their homes, you might do that. I'm going to leave this right here. If you would like to copy down the times and the hours, feel free to do so. And would you leave it so I can take it with me, because I'd like to remember and do it myself. Okay. Yes, questions? No question? About anything. You have to be wise. We can shift level. Sir.
I'm asking about cause and effect. And is it a reality? Like most things are. Do you think about causes? I mean, effects. What happens if something happens? Does it come to you just what caused it? By just being there with it?
Well, in the universe, is that question come through, all right? Okay. In the universe of forms, everything is related to everything else in a cause and effect way. Yes, that is true of forms. When you get out of form, that all turns into a dream. Now, the question of whether you think about it or not is often a way of getting caught back into your mind to think about why did this happen, rather than just being with what is. If you look at like Buddha's law of dependent origination, you see that